taking a moment to slow down. It's my job to give someone the opportunity to either do better or recognise where improvement is required. An adaptation from New Zealand culture. So you really need to understand, what do the patients need to free up the time for the doctors and nurses. So as a leader, we need to be able to have that mindset, the adaptability to lead our people through that journey. But sadly, if we think about the drivers for change, New Zealand is often a little bit behind some of the global changes, and that can be a really good thing in terms of let other people figure it out and then we'll just step in.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of NZ Speak, the show where we dig into leadership, culture, career, and the stories behind the people making it all happen.
Now today we have a very special guest who has navigated cultures across continents and mastered the art of leading teams in healthcare sector. She's a general manager at QuayMed and a lecturer shaping the next generation of leaders and someone who believed that people are the heart of every organization. Now, she's running healthcare in New Zealand like she has been born to do it. Coffee in hand and fixing problem before breakfast with a smile that says, yep, I have seen it all.
If you have ever wondered how to lead with heart, hire with wisdom, and survive the chaos of healthcare unfiltered and in the real time, then today's episode is for you. Welcome to New Zealand Speak.
Welcome, Michelle. Thank you for joining us. It's really a pleasure to have you with us at our podcast, New Zealand Speak.
Super excited again to meet you. And many of our listeners are those who are migrating from their native country and moved here. And they want to know, like, when you moved from Scotland to here, how did you felt about it? How did you deal the shift?
How your journey begins, actually.
Yeah, do you mean from a workplace perspective, like adapting to New Zealand culture?
Yeah.
Yeah, so coming from Scotland, I was also in Melbourne beforehand, but primarily if you think about Scotland culture, we're naturally very direct, have quite a dry, sarcastic humour, which doesn't go down very well in New Zealand. So I suppose from my perspective, that direct nature, it was about taking a moment to slow down, really think about my audience and adapting my style. And I suppose when you think about it, so that's New Zealand culture, right? Because it can be misinterpreted. People think that you're being aggressive or quite rude because it's just different to what they're used to. But when you think about it from a leadership perspective, you're actually doing that all the time. So yeah, that was an adaptation from New Zealand culture. But when you're leading teams and leading people, you actually need to do that nearly on a daily basis, right? So if you've got a team of, say, 5 people, you need to have 5 different styles to get the same result, you know? So even now, there's some people on my team where I can be a bit more direct, and that's completely fine. And then there's some people that they would probably be in tears. So, you know, we have a bit of a softer approach. So when you think about it like that, you're constantly having to have an individualized approach. And I suppose one other key point, which is really important for people planning on coming to New Zealand or new to New Zealand has quite a toughen up culture.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and naturally my leadership style is very people-centric, talking about emotional culture. So in a toughen up culture, that's quite unheard of. And it's about breaking down those barriers in terms of what people need. And I suppose I'm having conversations with leaders and consultants in that space just now, and we are seeing a shift, which is amazing. But yeah, we don't really talk about our feelings at the workplace, but that is slowly moving, which I think is pretty cool. And it's a sign of companies, industries understanding what people need and what they need for success as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. But then we would want to go a little bit further to the past and right from the beginning, when you actually moved to healthcare sector. So what drew you to healthcare sector? Why healthcare?
Yeah, so I suppose to set the foundation, my original study was biomedical science. So that's where the love for the human body, human physiology, genetics came from. But I was like, I cannot spend all my days in a lab, just cannot do it. So that's where really my leadership journey started in the healthcare, in private healthcare in Glasgow, because healthcare is very purpose-driven and it's very meaningful. And even though I'm non-clinical, you make a huge difference in people's lives. And that's where I suppose I kind of fell into private healthcare. And now my full career has spent in healthcare. And it very quickly teaches you how to be adaptable, empathy, because people don't want to become into medical appointments, And really, I had a natural flair for looking at systems and processes and how can we improve for patient experience and service excellence. And I suppose it's just blossomed from there.
But if you talk about in the healthcare sector, like what's a common mistake which from a leadership perspective one should be aware of?
Yeah, I would say the biggest barrier or kind of avoidance that I see, and it's probably not even just healthcare specific, it's leadership in general in New Zealand, is people avoiding the hard conversations, because it makes people feel uncomfortable. They feel like they're personally attacking someone. But, our job as leaders, I see it's my job to give someone the opportunity to either do better or recognize where improvement is required. So as a leader, if we see a behavior or an action that is perhaps not quite what we would expect and we don't do anything about it, we're actually sending a message that, hey, that's okay, because we're not, so you're part of the problem, right? And nothing will kill your culture more than you've got a team of folk and there's this outlier and they're like, there's nothing being done about this, So for me, I say it's our job to have those difficult conversations, to open space, because when you think about it, most people don't get up in the morning and intentionally want to come to work to be a pain in the butt. They don't. There's always a deeper underlying problem. Our job is to facilitate that space so that they can share. It's usually not the thing that's happening. It's much deeper. So how do we get that out of that person so that we can support them? So I would say the difficult conversations is definitely something, especially in New Zealand culture, we have a bit of a conflict avoidance.
Yeah.
But actually it's so critical, to set that standard. And sometimes it's about talking about a common goal or relating it to your values. That's why that's really important. It removes that personal part and it really puts it into more systems and behaviours that we want to see.
And I mean, is there a culture of lead from top or lead from front?
So I would say in New Zealand, there's not an authoritative control in terms of some cultures. If you're coming from maybe China or India, where some of our students do come from, or our workforce, the power dynamics are very different. Whereas here, it's much more, when we think about decision making, it's much more consensus, it's much more collaborative. It takes a bit longer, and that has pros and cons, So obviously, we can't generalize for every organisation, but I would say from a New Zealand culture, there's this non-hierarchical in terms of everyone has a voice. How do we facilitate that? And generally, expectations should be set at the top, at board level, at executive leadership level. Your job is to role model the expectations. So to some degree, you expect more from those at the top. But I would say, from an authoritative perspective, you've got more buy-in, you've got more say, you have more contribution compared to perhaps some working cultures that people are used to.
Quite interesting.
Yeah, very interesting.
I mean, the entire leadership in healthcare sector, it seems like a storming weather in New Zealand, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And as you rightly said, that it is quite slow. People need consensus and there's a tendency to avoid conflicts. Now, do you think that New Zealand is slow strategically or it's actually slow in a way that slow and steady wins the race? How do you describe that?
Yeah. I don't know if it's slow on purpose. I think it's just part of the culture in terms of the population, the makeup of businesses, So to put it into perspective, the amount of businesses in New Zealand that are classed as small, which is 20 people and under, I think it's like 97%.
Yeah.
So that changes the dynamic immediately. You've got room to incorporate more people in decision making. In healthcare, you've got to balance safety and risk. So that's a huge pro. If you've got the time to make sure that your decision or your initiative or your process is actually going to have the desired outcomes that you want. But at the same time, when we think about the pandemic and COVID, you didn't have time to make a decision over a period of time. People had about 12 hours to decide, what does tomorrow look like? So as a leader, we need to be able to have that mindset, the adaptability to lead our people through that journey. And if you are making your decisions a bit slower and that's intentional, you need to have a clear direction and clear accountability, because sometimes the longer it takes, do you have too much information? Do you go off track? So how do you manage that process so that you do reach that end or your decision or whatever that may look like, and not blow out budgets, blow out timelines?
In terms of resistance to change, right? If we talk about that part, isn't the culture here like we should go ahead with whatever we have and we should not change too much into the leadership and the culture of the
Yeah, from my experience, there is a culture of why change it? We've always done it that way and it's fine. But sadly, if we think about the drivers for change, New Zealand is often a little bit behind some of the global changes, and that can be a really good thing in terms of let other people figure it out and then we'll just step in when we know what we're doing. But to be competitive, if you think about it from a consumer, customer, or even a staff perspective, people have so many options now. So your resistance to change, you need to understand how to overcome it. And I think from a future leader, having that adaptability to change and take your teams through change is absolutely huge, because your business will not survive. People now have the option of so many different ways to work. People are becoming more picky on what's important to them. And I think this is also highlighted after COVID. Whereas if you think about generational, people would get a job and they would just stay there for life and whatever happened. Whereas now people are like, no, I want better work conditions. I want well-being is actually really important to me. I want flexibility. And if you can't offer me that, I will go and find it somewhere else. And then if you think about it from competitiveness in global markets, if you are not competitive, think about technology, for example, you will be left behind. And then what results in that is your business will not survive. So I think there is a movement. I think COVID has forced New Zealand to react really fast out of not having choice, which is obviously a really good thing it's a good thing for us.
Since you talk about about the future leaders, you are teaching as a professor to the management students. What's one misconception usually students have about managing people? They come up with so many ideas and thoughts to you.
Yeah. And I suppose, just to kind of set the scene, New Zealand is very diverse, and we're in Auckland right now, which is exceptionally diverse, which is amazing. But a biggest hurdle that I see is the expectation that you have all the answers. We do not have all the answers, And also thinking about it historically, normally leaders are the folk who have been really good at the task. So we've been really good at the job. We're very technical, very practical. And then we get promoted to leadership. And sometimes you become a bit more removed from that. You're not the expert in that area, but you don't have all the answers. And if you think that you have all the answers, perhaps leadership is not for you. You have a team of folk who have diverse thoughts, feelings, ideas, experiences. So when we talk about this people-centric leadership, how do you create this environment where you can get that out of your people? And if you don't know the answer, it's about, the problem solving and using your initiative, right? Okay, I don't have it, but let's work on it together. Let's go and find the answer. Or what do you think? What do you think we should do in this? Instead of being the person who's always solving the problem, because that's something that I see needs developed, is that initiative, people to use their own initiative and problem solve. But we don't know everything.
Yeah. And I think it's everywhere, I guess, like in any industry you go. But then what you have mentioned in your conversation, we heard accountability, we heard adaptability, and you have been talking about how to manage people, how to lead teams as well, just more like people-first leadership that you have been focusing in your entire conversation. Now, when you compare it with the day-to-day operations in healthcare, which is often very fast-paced, as per my understanding, right? And in New Zealand, there's a lot of pressure in the healthcare sector as well.
Yeah.
So how does people-first leadership approach work in a day-to-day operations of healthcare industry?
Yeah. The biggest thing I see when I'm doing leadership development or talking to an amazing group like you guys is about the foundation, relationship. You cannot grow businesses, make massive changes, people have great ideas, very entrepreneurial. You cannot do any of that if you don't start to build the relationships. So for me, in day-to-day, people-centric is that people want to feel heard and they want to feel valued and respected. And that sounds very simple and straightforward, but it doesn't actually happen in day-to-day. So how do we begin to create that culture where people are actively contributing to that every single day? And that's like having check-ins, but not just about performance. Like, how are you actually? How is, if they've got kids, how is the kids? How was your party on the weekend? And it's not about, you want to be authentic in those conversations, but it's about seeing the person instead of just being so focused on systems and processes. And then how do we develop our people? So I'm really passionate about professional development for every single person. Being in healthcare, there's a huge focus on clinical because it's required that you must do X amount of professional development. But what about our administration? What about our management teams, Do you want to have an organisation where your people are not growing and they're stagnant, So one thing I'm really passionate for advocating for is professional development for everyone. And let's face it, we spend so much time at work, we need to have fun. If you spend like 40 plus hours at work, you probably see your colleagues more than you maybe see your partners or your family. As long as people know when the hard work needs to get done, but how are we celebrating the wins? And I think we're so future focused. Mm-hmm. We're so big on strategy, big picture, that we actually forget to take a moment and celebrate the small wins, the big wins. And it doesn't have to cost anything. It doesn't have to be huge, but that is very meaningful. Just that recognition, thank you, goes very far. Mm-hmm. And what you see from that is productivity improves, patient outcomes improve, problem solving, people will come up with great ideas. And one of the biggest things I always say is, this all sounds like rainbows and butterflies, but when times are tough and times are hard, doing all this work is what pulls us through. And then your teams will naturally, if there's anything that needs to be resolved, they'll just sort it out themselves. It doesn't get escalated, it doesn't blow out of proportion, and then you've got to step in to help. And to me, all of that leads to a very people-centric culture, organisation where everyone, they know what's expected of them and they feel valued in their position as well.
Quite insightful. From leadership perspective, so many changes are happening, so many shifts are happening. So from healthcare point of views, what could be the changes you are expecting in next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah. So we're already seeing a shift in healthcare, especially in the digital world, and the government's already introduced the health 24/7, so it's about accessibility. And there's changes happening from next year at government level in terms of, so if we look at primary healthcare, there's a small portion of funding that is now changing to outcome-based.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter about the volume, it's actually about the outcomes that are received. That takes place next year. That's a massive change. And I see a huge shift in healthcare to be a more outcomes-based system delivery, even across private healthcare. And this does happen in places like Netherlands, Sweden, and the States. So it's called a values healthcare-based system. So, if you think about it, you go to the specialist, and then you're sent for a scan, then you have a surgery, then you maybe have physio. It's quite fragmented, and who takes responsibility for when care is perhaps not quite going to plan? So what I see happening is this changing more to a bundled care based on outcomes, So rather than you get paid for the delivery of a service, you're actually paid on the results of the service. So when we look at overseas numbers, for example, the Netherlands, who implement this values-based, outcome-based, they saw a reduction, I think it was about 30% in unnecessary admissions to hospital. And then if we look at Sweden, who also have a great healthcare system, they have like a spinal surgery bundle. And I think the results they had were the cost per patient went down by 11%, but the volume of patients actually went up by 22%. Because there is a misconception that people are doing it to cut corners or cut money, but actually it's about how do we keep New Zealanders healthy and how are we measuring that? So on the back of that, I also see a huge change in data and how we're measuring outcomes to deliver systems. So it's all about that system design. What is that going to look like? And I think data is going to be incorporated quite hugely, so we need future leaders who are.
But in terms of leadership in the change, right? So definitely if the change and the shift will come, they will need the new skill set as well.
Yeah.
And what do you think those skill sets should be?
So first of all, digital literacy. That is, you are going to have to excel in that area. Absolutely understand and also have a thirst for curiosity and experimenting and not being scared or anxious of technology like AI is being incorporated, and that's not going to change. Data, we need to understand numbers. We need to be comfortable working with numbers, but what does it mean? And I think that we're going to be driven a lot on that data. And we need a huge shift on emotional and cultural intelligence. There's already a shift away from very system task focused, results focused. Right. We can already see a shift. The emotional culture is incredibly important. So we need leaders who understand what does that mean and how do we open space for that conversation, because it makes people really uncomfortable to talk about feelings in the workplace. And then naturally what comes with that is you're more resilient, you're adaptable to change, and you will actually drive that change in the organisation. And I think that's what businesses need, the people to drive these changes.
Yeah, and I think that's what you talked about, professional development. And that's why it plays a critical role in health sector or in any other sector as well.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned about people, process, data, right? This is the core of any organization, the heart of any organization. Now, you also talked about silos, like in healthcare, everything is moving in silos. And we read a lot where healthcare industry is bit more dependent on manual work and paperwork. Like there's a bunch of paperwork that administration need to take care. What are the things that healthcare sector or as a leader of QuayMed you are doing? Like what are the practices? What are your approach to that?
In primary healthcare specifically, the challenge is the time that doctors have with patients. The system is a bit broken at the moment. So thankfully for us, we do everything that we have is digital. It's all electronic. We don't have any paper-based. But the biggest thing I would say, and this is also going back to how is healthcare going to change, is about different models of working, diversifying how you work in healthcare, because just a GP-patient relationship no longer fits the mold, So what we're seeing in general practice, so that's primary healthcare, is we're seeing the introduction of health coaches. We're seeing the introduction of health improvement practitioners for mental health support. We're seeing ambulance staff, so emergency medical technicians come in. We're seeing clinical pharmacists come in. So you really need to understand, what do the patients need to free up the time for the doctors and nurses, so that they can do the thing that only they can do.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to have an organisation, or you need to have leaders that are open to experimenting with these additional services. But then how do you build trust with your patients? Because they get so used to the relationship with the doctors. So you've got to think about, when you get the patient into your practice, what is everything that we can do for them in that moment, so that they don't have to go to another 5 appointments elsewhere. Because that's another barrier for health outcomes for some demographics, is getting them to additional appointments. And there is cost is a barrier as well, transportation.
Yeah.
So we're looking at, when they're in here, what can we offer them? Long-term chronic condition management. So health coaches can help with, what does a healthy lifestyle in terms of diet and exercise look like? If someone's got mental health concerns, how can we support them in everyday small functions that make a huge difference? The nurses and the doctors don't need to be a part of that. Clinical pharmacists. So a doctor prescribes a medication. The patient, you have a better result when the patient understands why they have been prescribed a medication. So now we have a clinical pharmacist who can make sure that someone sees through the end of their treatment. They understand the consequences for not finishing it. They understand why they've been given it. And when all of that works together, our patient outcomes improve. And this is a change that we're seeing happening. This is actively happening right now. And I see this model just getting stronger. And again, it's coming back to, we're looking at outcomes. The delivery is no longer enough on its own. It's actually, how are we improving, or how are we preventing, and how are we creating equitable care for everyone out there across New Zealand. You know, you've got rural, you've got city centre, they all have different challenges. So how do we remove those barriers so that every New Zealander has the same access to care and has the same chance of improving or doing better, you know? So I would say that's a huge shift. And using AI.
Yeah.
You know, it's been around for a few years now. Using AI in consultations, so that the doctor can actually really focus on the patient instead of the questions. And there's some models that have been approved by the Medical Council in New Zealand, making sure that patient data is not being saved, nothing is identifiable as an individual. You know, so it's thinking about, how can we work smarter to better utilise the time that we have, because we don't have an unlimited time. And that takes a leader who can make sure that people understand why the need for that is important, and also supporting them through those changes, because these are massive changes, especially for New Zealand. And you need leaders who understand it and will actually advocate for these changes as well. We need leaders to be embracing this. And really, if you think about it, our patient service, patient excellence is really critical as part of that.
You know, learning from you, I see that healthcare industry in New Zealand, it's actually doing pretty good job in integrating their services with technology as well. And I think this is the need of the hour as well, right?
Yeah.
I guess there's one challenge that healthcare industry have always faced. It's more related to the communication, the healthcare communication. How would you describe healthcare communication in New Zealand?
Oh.
Sorry, went on the topic.
Communication. So from my experience, lack of.
Mm-hmm.
I've gone into many organisations, and people don't have emails. How do you communicate? You know, like, how are you sharing information? So I think the biggest thing is about, what is effective communication, and what are we sharing that's actually important, and we're not just clogging up people's time. And the communication goes internally and also to your patients. You know, are you staying in touch with your patients? But for me, the biggest barrier I see is the silos of departments, and how do we bring them together? and encouraging people to think outside where they perhaps sit in the organisation. And something as simple as providing everyone with an email. And this sounds ridiculous, but I've now been in 2 organisations where people did not have emails. You've got people who are part-time, you've got people on leave. You cannot physically speak to every single person. And remember, as a leader, and sometimes it's also, how do you make it a bit fun? So do you introduce like a monthly newsletter where you get to know some of your staff members, because sometimes you don't have the luxury of having a half-hour lunch break with someone. Sharing critical updates like IT updates. And what kind of structure are you creating internally so that you can pass on that information? We've got all this technology, but the technology sometimes has its moment.
Sure.
So how do we know that, hey, this ACC claim is not going through, their system's down, it's not actually our system? So communication, usually from my experience, any sort of breakdown in relationship is due to communication. It's about how the person is interpreting the information. So you've got to make sure the person understands what you're actually saying. Just because you think you've said it doesn't mean that's how they have received it. And that can be in person, whether by email, things can be interpreted different depending on how you're feeling on that day as well. But I suppose what I've seen is a lack of communication that creates a disconnect. It creates when you have the chatter in the background, because if you don't tell people, they will make it up themselves. You want to be the first one. And sometimes if you can't maybe say what it is, just saying that, like, hey, look, we'll share it with you when we can. There's nothing worse than dead silence. People will fill that silence with their own stories, and that will kill your culture. So I suppose there's many branches to communication. And yeah, I think let's share more. We're not sharing enough.
So the key is open communication instead of sudden surprise.
Absolutely. And I think we never get it right, but I have moments where I'm like, oh my goodness, sorry, I should have let people know. Sometimes that vulnerability, like, oh my goodness, I messed up, but yes, open communication, two-way feedback is critical. It shouldn't just be leader or manager to the person. Actually, what do you need from me? Is there anything missing that you need that I have overlooked, So something as simple as having that weekly catch-up. Doesn't have to be work-focused. When someone knows they've got that safe, protected time, and we get to build that relationship, the foundation that we need before we do all these other amazing things. Something as simple as that. And I always say to any leader, cancel any meeting, never cancel a one-to-one. Never. They're so important. Really.
Very good point.
Very well. Yeah, it is. And I think the way you talked about collaboration, right? In communication is not just about collaborating with people, but then people, systems, processes, technology, partners everywhere. I think you need to collaborate to communicate effectively as well. It's two-way conversation.
Absolutely.
Right. So, and I remember one of our professors told us about leadership is a dance. So you dance in sync with each other, with, your team members and with others, with your surrounding as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it comes back to, you don't know it all, so you need to be having that communication, getting the ideas out, and really just creating that space where people feel there's no consequence or repercussions, because sometimes that can be a fear in some cultures, workplace cultures, like there's fear of consequences if I'm open and say this, whereas there's nothing worse than that, if something's also not going to plan, you need people to be able to share that as well. That's really
great. So here comes a surprise element for you.
So we had a very serious conversation. But pretty interesting. But let's have some fun.
Yes. Okay.
And it's a surprise element. Sorry for not telling you about it. But so here's a rapid fire round we're going to do with you. So you can't think, right? You cannot overthink.
Okay, that's
to be run over.
Yes.
Exactly.
So there will be 10 questions. 5 will be from Abhi and 5 from my side.
All right. So you ready?
Yes, please.
Are you excited?
All right, let's do it.
Great. So Scotland or New Zealand? Best place for a morning coffee?
Oh, New Zealand.
Wow. If you had to compare a leadership style to an animal, what would it be?
Oh, an eagle.
Eager. Wow, nice.
We thought so.
We thought so, yeah? But we would like to know, like, why. Let's move to another question. Which superpower would make your job way easier? Taking it.
I think it would just be like some sort of communication, like to everyone.
Mind reading?
Oh, no. Do you want to read people's minds? Probably not. We'll come back to that one.
Okay, all right. We'll give you a point. So one thing you wish all managers would stop doing?
Stop doing?
Yeah.
Avoiding difficult conversations.
Great.
Stop doing.
Yeah, we're going to have some great comments. Which personality drains you more? The chronic overthinker or the chronic overtalker?
Oh, perhaps the overtalker.
Okay.
Because you need to listen.
Yeah. Right. All right, Ranalik, to you.
Oh, no.
So if your career were a book, what would be the title of current chapter be?
It would be expansion.
Spatch?
Yes.
Nice.
Nice. If you weren't in a healthcare, you would be?
Oh, academia full-time. That's my alternative. I know that doesn't, yeah.
Matches your personality as well? Yes. One word your team would use to describe you?
Dynamic.
Absolutely. We thought, yeah. If you could instantly master one skill tomorrow, what would it be?
I'm flawless.
No, we're never. Yeah, no.
Anything which comes to your mind, you need to be fast.
I know. It's taking far too long. Probably, I'm really fast thinking and probably need to do better at listening better because I'm really fast thinking. We're a step ahead. So, yeah, I think I should.
Doing the fast decision making?
No, just listening better.
Okay.
Like just taking the time to actually truly listen. I know that it probably contradicts a lot of what we just said, but really, yeah, I think we all could be one.
And the final one is like, which is more you, early bird leader or speak to me after coffee?
What was the first one? Sorry, the first one.
Early bird leader?
Oh, early bird. I'm up at 4 a.m. So you get me at my best. Yeah, obviously, like you poor guys who had your class at 3 p.m., you're not getting the best out of me. I am much more productive in the morning, but early bird for me, absolutely.
That's the end of the rapid fire, I guess.
Thank you for the exciting answers.
But then we would want to know why eagle? Why do you think eagle?
Eagle. Well, I suppose they're very strong. They're like a leader of the pack, very decisive. They know what they want. And I think sprinkled with a little bit of the owl, which is a bit of organisation and a bit of order, I would say. But yeah, I think just that eagle from a strong leadership perspective, that really stands out.
Also far-sighted?
Yes.
Yeah.
They
That's a
look
good one, yeah.
far. Yeah.
You know, like projection
Yes.
casting. You do it to be a step ahead, right, as a leader, and you have to see the problems before they actually
Exactly.
But
You told us once that you're more like a devil advocate
yes,
when you wear those six thinking hats.
the black hat. Yeah. I'm still the black hat. Yeah, and I just did it with our most recent class, and I was just like, it's just natural, you know. You can dip into all thoughts and feelings, but naturally, I'm a reflector. So I can make a decision in the moment, but I naturally like to go away and be like, okay, but what about this and what about that? And that's naturally the black hat, right? Devil's advocate. So there we go.
Since you said that about the eagle thing, right? So in terms of hiring people or hiring teams, when you look into the CV, like, do you just look into the CV or what beyond CV you look for?
Nah, because if you think about it at the end of the day, and it depends on, we doing a lot of recruitment at the moment, some, if not all skills can be taught, right, to some capacity.
Yeah.
So really what I'm looking for is the attitude, the desire, wanting to learn, the curiosity. You know, how do they fit within that organisation? You know, if you want to have that culture of growth, expansion. The skills, we can teach those skills, you know, but if you don't have the natural curiosity, a bit of the problem solving, there's only so much of a person that is genetic that we cannot change. So sometimes the CV, cover letters, you're just like, you want to have a good conversation with the individual. For me, that's far more meaningful, and usually you can determine whether they're going to be the right fit for that organization.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And you will see from the confidence of the person how he will fit or she will fit into the team or not.
Absolutely. You know, there's so many other factors beyond your either qualification, which I know I should not be saying, but let's face it, you can be the most qualified in the world, but if you don't have the kind of open mindset, change mindset, you're quite rigid, it's going to be a struggle. Well, it depends, I suppose, what industry you're in, but life experience, and that's why I love being in New Zealand, and the diversity of people's experience brings so much more value, in that travel and international experience is absolutely huge. And what we need in New Zealand is more people to embrace that and be open to embracing that, because we all bring something unique to the table, and that's special. That can't be taken away from us. So, yeah.
Great insight.
So one last question from our side.
Yes.
Then we can wrap it up. So for our viewers, those who do not come from clinical or healthcare background, right, what opportunities do you see that exist for them in New Zealand?
So obviously my background is healthcare. So if we want to talk about nursing, just as a short example, international nurses in New Zealand make up like 46.6% of the workforce.
Mm-hmm.
We need people, you know, and that's the same for all industries. And we need a number of skills. The only barrier that could be for some folk is the size of New Zealand and the opportunity, because we have, as I said earlier, around 97% of our businesses are small, under 20 folk.
Yes.
That's a huge adjustment for, we've got some people in class that have 20,000 people in their organisation. That's a massive culture change. Also, how you work day to day is very different. But we do need people, and we need the people with the diverse skills, like the people who have started their own businesses, IT, startups, technology, and healthcare in particular. We need it. You know, people are, it's quite transient here. People are looking for other opportunities. But in terms of immigration, it makes up a huge proportion of our workforce. And we need that, you know, especially in healthcare. We absolutely do. So I would say to anyone who is thinking about it, all you can do is try. You don't ever want to have what ifs, right? What's the worst that's going to happen?
Absolutely.
You know. And but we need people, we need leaders, and we need those future focused leaders as well. So yeah.
That's amazing.
Great answers, Michelle, as always.
Really an insightful conversation with you. Thank you so much, Tommy. It was really amazing having you. And I'm sure our viewers would take a lot of takeaways from our conversation.
Please subscribe, like, and comment, because I'm sure they're going to have some awesome guests, great topics, and you folk out there need to know this stuff. It's really important.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been awesome. Thanks for having me. Cheers.